Ronald, have you hear me?
I can, yes.
Also my picture?
Yes, I can also see your
Thank you.
video very well.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Kazim.
Ronnie, I will mute a little bit just to respond to my Minister call, yeah?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Boa tarde, chefe.
Hello, Daniel. Welcome. Can you hear us?
Hey, good morning.
you
I'm
are.
trying to start my video. One moment.
That's okay.
Is everyone there, Ronnie? I think we're missing only Funi and Navina right now, right?
Correct. Funi is trying to connect. Funi should be there now. Over.
Yeah.
Funi, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Great. There she is. That's okay. That's okay. We can see you. We can hear you perfectly. Welcome. So Cecilia, can you hear me?
Yes, Ronnie.
So basically,
can hear
we're missing Navina.
Yes. People trying to reach her in other ways, but seems like she's not connected.
Yeah.
Let us
Some
wait 5
technical
minutes.
problems.
Yeah.
Good. I guess I'll mute myself and I leave it up to you.
No.
Okay. Hello, Navina. How are you? Welcome. Navi, could you hear me? Great.
Hi, good morning. Can you hear me?
Perfect. Perfect. We can hear you
Apologies
perfectly.
for the delay. We have internet issues. I might be kicked out a few times during today's session.
Understandable. We can hear you and see you perfectly. Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you.
So we're all set. Cecilia,
Yes.
we're all set.
Alessandra, my co-chair, will start the meeting today.
Oh, great. Great.
Apologies for the delay. I think there was a bit of mix up in my notes. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and welcome back to this Adaptation Committee 17th meeting. This is the third day, I believe, that we meet in this modality. We've had 2 very good days, I think, yesterday and the day before yesterday, with very interesting discussions. And I've seen that many of you have already provided input on the documents in the common space. Thank you very much for that, including, of course, to the observers who've been accompanying us today. Without much further ado, let us get started on the business of the day. We will begin by addressing item 6D in our agenda, modalities for recognizing the adaptation efforts of developing country parties. I would like to invite you to open the document AC/2020/6, Synthesis Report on how developing countries are addressing hazards, focusing on relevant lessons learned and good practices. I would like to start by inviting the secretariat, please, to give us an introduction to the background paper that has been prepared for this item. The secretariat, please.
Thank you very much. As you may recall, the CMA in its decision 11 CMA 1 requested the Secretariat under the guidance of the AC and the LEC to prepare synthesis reports every 2 years starting in 2020 to cover specific adaptation themes and relevance lessons learned and good practice so as to recognize the adaptation efforts of developing countries. At its last meeting, the AC agreed on this theme for its first synthesis report, namely how developing countries are addressing hazards, focusing on relevant lessons learned and good practices. The AC also requested the Secretariat to develop an initial draft for consideration at AC17. In terms of the scope of the draft paper so far, it looks at identifying actions in response to climate hazards. It reviews documents submitted by developing countries to the Secretariat. This includes National Adaptation Plan documents, NDCs, NatComs, but now also adaptation communications, as well as other reports, the examples shared by developing countries in the context of the technical examination process on adaptation, but also through the work of the AC and the LEC. It's still ongoing. So far, 89 NDCs have been included out of over 100 of those submitted by developing countries with an adaptation component. And we have also considered all maps so far submitted. We have not yet included the adaptation communications. As of now, we believe there are 3 submitted, including 1 from the developing countries. But as you may be aware, in the absence of a dedicated registry, we would have to look through all the possible channels to fish out the relevant information. In terms of what's included in the draft report so far, following an introduction, you'll have an overview of adaptation efforts in response to multiple climate hazards, after which you'll have efforts by specific type of hazards, including floods, droughts, sea level rise, storms, and hurricanes. And these were the ones mostly included in NDCs by developing countries. We not only looked at the type of hazards, what kind of adaptation efforts countries are doing, but also by the type of measure, whether these measures are included in strategies, plans, legal or regulatory frameworks, but also in project implementation. The paper then looks at overall lessons learned, some of them depicted below, saying that one of the good practices that countries have recognized themselves is integrating disaster risk reduction into national adaptation plans, but also to adopt a multi-sectoral national adaptation plans and focusing on the most vulnerable, but also given the transboundary nature of many hazards, to look at regional adaptation efforts. In terms of the next steps, the AC may wish to discuss ways to finalize the draft, including any follow-up actions, any issues that the AC would like to be covered some more, and also to decide whether or not the finalized report should be published in a more user-friendly format. With that, I thank you very much and hand over to the co-chair again.
Thank you very much, Annette, for the good overview of the paper we have in front of us for consideration at this session. Like yesterday and the day before, I'd like to open the floor for comments and suggestions by members of the Adaptation Committee first. If you would like to take the floor, please type your name in the chat so that I can keep track of the required intervention. Nahim, please, you have the floor. Nahim?
Yeah, sorry. Can you hear me? Okay. So just, I was thinking that the hazards we have listed here, there are certain biological hazards which are not included. Like we have the very severe locust attack is still going on in most of the countries, neighboring countries, as well as Pakistan. So locust is a hazard which is a biological hazard, and it has a link with the climate change as well. So I don't know whether that can be included in this or not. Just a question. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Nahim, for this question. Perhaps we will ask later the Secretariat to tell us how the scope was identified. I'll now give the floor to Kazim, please.
Thank you, Co-Chair. I have just provided some comments in the documents. Firstly, appreciate Secretariat for the synthesis report. As we considered the report, compiled and reviewed several INDCs and NDCs put forward by the parties. The report is entirely relies on these two documents. At the same time, we are aware that the issue of climate hazard were not outlined as such on the unedified format of NDC formulation and preparation. So there are similarities on the adaptation process and climate hazard risk reduction, but sometimes differences on the type of management and preparedness. I wish to suggest that the AC take it as a first draft and in the way forward, look at the other relevant strategy under UN and UNFCCC, particularly the UN Sandy Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction 2030-2050, and also 2 years work program of Executive Committee of the VASO International Mechanism on Loss and Damage. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that suggestion. I believe that when discussing the integration with the DRR and climate change adaptation, this could, for instance, be addressed. Clifford, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Happy to see you again this morning. I first would begin by thanking the Secretariat for this synthesis report. I think it is very comprehensive, very balanced, and again, showing the excellent work that the Adaptation Committee Secretariat is really doing. Really proud of what is happening, and really to commend them and encourage them to continue along this line, Co-Chair. Locust, I think locust wasn't reported in the document, the sources that were used, and I think the first two speakers spoke about so there may be other hazards, of course, that haven't been captured because of the source that was used, but those are equally important, and certainly if there's a way to capture that there are other hazards that are significant, then maybe we can look for a place to put that. Just some comments. We didn't see how many national communications were used. We saw 89 NDCs and I think NAPs, 18 NAPs, but not the number of national communications. Substantially in figure 1, which shows I think the percentage of hazards based on the reports. I think the key should be labeled at the bottom that this is percentage of the total. It could be erroneously thought of as numbers of parties, something like that. But It's not labeled, figure 1, and I'd suggest that a label put there percentage of total or something like that, because I think it's a percentage that's captured. In para 10, co-chair, legal and policy frameworks, good examples here, but again, these are examples, and I'm suggesting that there are other examples and other policies and frameworks. A number of them are out there that I think we should capture some, maybe in an annex. I know we're in the report, you're using it, maybe the examples, but there are others, and we don't want to be inclusive, or we don't want to leave anyone out. So maybe I would suggest that we consider how we could include other policy frameworks in an annex, and also that would also go the other section, the sectoral adaptation, where we have some examples, but there are other, and hazards by type, etc., that you may in an annex include some of the others that are there. I don't know if these are the only ones that came out of the reports, but I'm sure that there are others. Finally, I'm suggesting in section 3.4, where we have storms and hurricanes, and wherever this occur, the generic name is tropical cyclone, and it should be replaced. Storms and hurricanes are the names for a specific region, but in another region they are called typhoons. In another region they are called tropical. But the generic name, as a meteorologist, so I wanted to replace anywhere we have in the document storms and hurricanes with tropical cyclone. I may come back. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Clifford, for those very good suggestions. I have Irina now in the list. Irina, please.
Yeah, colleagues, good afternoon, good morning, good evening. I would like to thank you, the Secretariat, for preparing this synthesis report, which is quite comprehensive and very interesting. Also, this report will be useful for all countries, including my countries, which is developed but still having economy in transition. I'll try to be brief and touch on only a few points of the report. Given that around 90% of developing countries face floods, frequency and intensity of which is rising due to climate change, I would suggest to provide more examples on transboundary cooperation in risk reduction. It would be, for example, description of cooperation in transboundary waters of Dniester rivers between Moldova, which is developing country, and Ukraine, which is economy in transition. This cooperation has a great and long history and covers not only floods, but droughts and other components related to water resources management, including flooding management. My other comments relates to the financial barrier to implement approved adaptation plans in developing countries. Are there any examples on how countries are trying to remove such a barrier? What kind of incentives for private sector are workable? In other words, it would be useful to reflect the issue concerning the mobilizing resources to implement already planned policies and measures. Of course, if it possible, to find such information. Also, and finally, I propose for this report to reflect somehow an experience how developing countries are getting and implementing advanced technologies for disaster risk reduction. Do you have such kind of information? And what is the role of transboundary cooperations in this context? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Irina, for your comments and suggestions, and also for the additional examples you have put on the table. We'll now go to Liu for your intervention. Liu, please.
Hi, good morning, afternoon, evening, my colleagues. And first of all, I also want to appreciate it to the Secretariat efforts for us to prepare this synthesis report. And there seemed to be a very very fruitful structure and the contents. My first comments is related to the table of the contents. I noted that there is five titles. But I think maybe we need to add a new title, which is the challenges and gaps related to the developing countries when they are addressing hazards. And also this new title, I think it should be, it would be better to follow with the overall lessons and learned. So that is to be very clearly to the readers and audience that we also have some something have to be done in the future that would be more important for the developing countries to know the facts is that we still have a lot of gaps need to be fulfilled, and but this important issue I didn't found from the existing contents, just a little bit raised under the section 4 overall lessons learned, that is the paragraph 55 and the 54 and 55, but it's very short and didn't give some illustration or the detailed what is the barriers for the problems of the availability of the resources, and what is the insufficiency support for the developing country parties to overcome to addressing the hazards. I think that it will be very valuable, much more will be enhance our value for this paper, for this report. This is my first comment, and the second is second comment is that when I also existed in the section 4, I observed that there is mention about climate smart agriculture, but I didn't found this. Sorry, I found that there is climate smart agriculture and integrated water resources management, development of early warning system and healthy climate services. That is some, etc. Some key areas for this issue under the paragraph 54. But I didn't found some relevant research or some evidence on this specific areas from the previous content of this paper. I just found some similar words with the climate smart agriculture, which is the when they mentioned about some cases in I forgot which country, but the name is modern sustainable agriculture. So I think when we to overall lessons and learn, that should be that should be concluded from the previous evidence or the research or some numbers, and then we can give some concreted lessons and learned. So that is more more useful and more and know some detailed on these issues. When we talk about the and also there's mention about the different sectors, such as some water resources and the others. I think they, when we talk about some challenges, gaps, we need connected with the means of implementation under the UNFCCC from 3 aspects to illustrate them, which include technical issue, capacity building issue, and finance issue. Those 3 aspects to give the to search more relevant cases, case studies, or the projected level story to explain them. For example, when we talk about technical challenges or gaps, we can to identify what is the problem. For example, existed in the earning systems. Maybe for earning systems on the agriculture or the sea level rise, and maybe some developing country party, they have the problem with the number of the monitoring sites is very few, so that they cannot to collect enough data to fulfill their technical gaps. And that is the problem they are facing right now. And there is more clearly on the technical level. And the capacity level, the capacity challenges and gaps, maybe we can to find there is, I noted that there is a lot of developing countries facing that they don't have enough professional workers to run the some useful machine or the others. And for the finance gaps and challenges, we also know that a lot of developing country party, they have no enough finance to support them to cover all their important hazard, or they cannot to cover enough types of the hazard. So that is, they are facing the challenges right now. I just want to say that we need to make more efforts to explore this area for this synthesis report. And another my last question related to the next step. There is mentioned about it, one of the next step is mentioned about discuss ways to finalize the draft. And I want to discuss with our colleagues this is the 2 years, it will be 2 years report, every 2 years report to the UNFCCC, and we will be finalized at the end of the 2021. So we have left three meetings for discussing this, for finalizing this report, and also if we want to make it published in a user-friendly format, we need also at least one time of meeting to discuss the format or the technical channel, which is more appropriated to publish it. So we only left 2 meetings to finalize it. And I'm not sure is that enough for us to finalize so long papers, or we need some cases as the Clifford proposal to add into the annex and to shorten the content on this basis. This is and what is the user-friendly format? Can we to use the existing channel to publish this synthesis report? I think we have a lot of channel, and which one is could use to publish it? I think AC web page or the Nairobi work program, the portal is useful, is proper to do this function. The last point that I agree with that the loss and damage is very relevant with this synthesis report, since it was very detailed to talk about what hazard and what resources could be help developing country parties to address the hazard, and what resources and what's the challenge and gaps that is maybe they are facing right now. So that they have been a lot of report, and we can to make use of them to avoid it to do some duplication work. And thank you. Sorry to take the long time. Thank you.
Thank you, Liu, for these detailed comments. I hope you'll have also a chance to transfer them into the documents in the discussion board. I have noted in particular the need to articulate better the challenges, as well as ensure that barriers and lessons learned are based on the evidence that has been collected and reported in the documents that are surveyed by the paper or in the paper, but also very concrete suggestions on the way forward towards finalization of the document. Pilar, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Alessandra, and I appreciate to see everyone again this morning from this evening and an afternoon in other cases. I would also like to express appreciation for the paper. It's an interesting paper. I have some comments. Some of them were already shared in the platform, the collaborative space. I will be well, as specific as possible. The first one is on the difference between the title, the scope, and the mandate. Just to ask for some kind of to be clear enough in terms of the difference and the relationship between those. My understanding, and I add a comment there to do that, is that the theme, the main topic we decided is how developing countries are addressing hazards. That's okay. And there are like two other features. The para 13 of decision 11 CMA1 established that the report, these reports are focused on lessons learned, that's and good practices that is adopted. At the same time, the main content of the decision and the context of the decision is the recognition of adaptation efforts of developing countries. So there are like three issues that are quite related, but in some cases appear expressed in a way, and in other places in another way. So maybe just to adopt one way in which it can appear across the board. That's a first one. And connected to that is the main scope and sense of the document, that is of course to be useful for the recognition of adaptation efforts of developing countries. So I think that any decision we take, for not today, but in the future, in relation to this document should be in light of that, if this document is or is not, and in which way is helpful for the recognition. And I want to say that I think is useful, of course. In more in terms of categories, and going to paragraph 7 and the subtitle 2.2, I made some suggestions for the categories. I'm not saying they are not good, but maybe some of them are a little bit odd for me. I'm suggesting to take on board cross-cutting considerations. Maybe I think the paper would benefit from gender considerations and of course the various approaches we explored in the past. As I mean ecosystem-based, nature-based, community-based. I'm not saying to move everything to that, but just to consider those approaches as one of the categories, since some of the countries are looking for, and we had experiences even in the examples that were provided in the document, appear some cases where cross-cutting considerations are important. Then we will not have any conclusion or any recommendation based on that because it's not included. So I think it's important to take that on board. Then sectoral and multi-sectoral, not only multi-sectoral, because that's for me, from technical perspective, that's the approach. You take it, you can take it sectoral or multi-sectoral, but maybe you don't do it sectoral. So just for the category, for me, that's the case. Then the focus on vulnerable groups and communities. And the last one is the multi-level approaches, including local, regional, and transboundary. And there, I also add my voice to the comment made by Irina. I think one of the things that could also be added to this paper is the transboundary considerations. I also recognize the effort made by different countries in their adaptation-related documents in order to include that information. Other two things that, from my perspective, could be added and I miss in this document is the relationship, as Liu and also Irina said, the relationship with finance, technology, and capacity building. It's something that is completely out of the paper, and it's difficult for us not to make that relationship very, very clear. I mean, these are the hazards and which are the means that the developing countries have in order to face those. So I see the value of adding that dimension too. Another comment is on, in terms of the examples, I am considering the proposal made by Cliff to have those the annex. I think it could work. At the same time, I would like to add the importance of considering all NAPs, since they are not much. So it could be good to have all NAPs that appear in NAP Central to have included, as well as current adaptation communications. I mean, I'm missing information about some sub-regions and regions in some cases. So to check that again, if possible. It could be one question in terms of the subcategories that we are using in terms of national plans, legal and regulatory frameworks, and project implementation. Maybe there, I always hear Navina talking about the problems with the project implementation oriented perspective. So maybe there it's more a question mark to continue the debate on that issue. And finally, on next steps, I agree we need at least one more meeting or more for discussion, even if I think I see the value of the document and I really recognize it. And AKP could be okay for me, as Liu said, as well as, of course, a user-friendly format, since a lot of information is coming from this paper and will be difficult to read other way. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Pilar, for your comments and suggestions. I very much like the idea of adding cross-cutting issues in the consideration of the paper, such as gender, indigenous people, but of course also many other of your comments are very valuable, and I'm sure the Secretariat has taken a good note of them. I have now Navina followed by Mariam. Navina, please.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. Good morning, good afternoon, evening, colleagues. First of all, I would like to thank the Secretariat for preparing this paper. I have a few high-level comments. I will provide more concrete comments in detail on the collaboration space. But I feel while the paper is surely a basis to work with at the moment, we have a key issue, and it's an outstanding discussion among us members trying to explain each other our understanding of the word effort and what effort entails. And from what I've been hearing today from colleagues, it seems to me that we have the same standpoint as in the past AC meeting and the ones before. We have very different understandings of what effort is. And I think we cannot go in a certain direction on the paper until all of us have a common understanding of this. Furthermore, I would like to agree with Clifford on the importance of national communication. And this is something essential to me, because we can look at NAPs. NAPs are very rich documents, and in the case of the documents on the NAP Central, explaining what a country wants to do, how they come up with it, etc. And these are very high-level summaries of certain priorities a country has. However, all of these are ex-ante documents, and we need to look at ex-post information in order to have an understanding of whether the effort was made or not. And to me, it's very difficult to have that work with the fact that most countries have not yet provided the fourth national communication, are still perhaps not able to provide a second national communication. So here I see a very intrinsic link to reporting, and I would like to have a paragraph in this paper explaining that efforts that are not reported cannot be recognized. And I think this is a very important fact. If people don't know that an effort took place, it's very difficult to recognize it. And I'm sure that this is interlinked to the previous point of trying to define a common understanding for us what an effort is and how it would be recognized. I think further, I like very much the idea of Irina in terms of efforts. For instance, one thing that I realized during the paper is that while we're talking about efforts of developing countries, we're not really reflecting the fact that many of the examples in the paper are joint efforts also with international support. And I would not like to see a paper that does not reflect accordingly the efforts of others, including developing countries, but also developed countries in providing such support. So these joint efforts should be reflected in an accurate manner. I think when it comes to efforts for me, and here's what Irina said, I find it a very good example. We could dive in more into the mobilization of private sector at the national level, regional level. I think here we have very rich examples, also examples as is this private sector that have been done really without external factors, I'll call them, because they don't need necessarily to be support. I agree with the nuance of technology. If a country is developing new technology and innovative approaches and is willing to share this with others, that should be recognized. For me, efforts that should be highlighted are more also on the institutional level. We know that a lot of things in planning and implementation are hampered due to institutional arrangements, institutional capacities, etc. And for instance, in order to attract finance, to mobilize finance, what we have seen in previous reports is we need a proper environment to do so. And if a country does not have a proper environment and is not doing an effort to do that, that also should be addressed in a way by highlighting and recognizing the efforts of those countries that are working on that. Further, and I think lastly, I don't see space on this paper to deal with gaps and needs or support needs, etc. We have other papers working on that, specifically working on that. And I wouldn't like to have repetitions of every single paper we work on every single paper we're working on. For me, the step now forward, while noting that the paper proposes two options, would be to not discuss those two options at the moment, but to actually allocate proper time at the next AC meeting, that we create an understanding of what efforts are, what we understand by it, and then we can take the discussion forward from there using this as a basis. Thank you.
Thank you, Navina, for your comments and for the suggestion on the way forward. This could perhaps be also a topic for discussion in the collaborative space as we gear up to the next meeting. Mariam, please, you're next in the list. Mariam.
Good morning and good evening, members. Thank you, Co-Chair, for giving me the floor. And I would like to join others in thanking the Secretariat and appreciating the effort that they have put into this very interesting paper. I, however, would like to make some comments and provide others in the AC collaboration space. First of all, I would like to speak a little bit about the context. As highlighted by one of the comments made by Pilar in the AC collaboration space, that throughout section 1 in the mandate, we need to add in the recommended action by the Adaptation Committee, we need to outline clearly that it's in the context of the recognition of adaptation effort. Further, regarding the context itself, I think that part of the story of the recognition of efforts of how developing countries have been addressing hazards is the limited capacities of developing countries, limited financial, technical / technology capacities in terms of immediately addressing those hazards, being on the short or the long term. And I think that that sense needs to be reflected. So we are recognizing, part of the story is that we are recognizing that despite all of those challenges, despite developing countries having capacity gaps and limited capacities, they are still contributing. And I see that that also needs to be reflected in the scope and the structure and the information, is that I do not see the part where it speaks about domestic resources of developing countries being put. So the costs incurred by developing countries in responding to those hazards and addressing those hazards in terms of the domestic resources that those countries are investing, again, despite their the restrictions on their budget, that could put a few countries into shifting some national budget allocations from, I don't know, health or education to responding to an immediate climate impact. These are also efforts that developing countries are putting. So I think that needs to be factored in. Another thing is, I think that the paper needs to be a little bit reflective of the regional adaptation efforts. And unfortunately, within the current scope of the documents that are included, I don't think that's very helpful to provide an overview of the regional efforts. So I think in that regard, maybe we can reach out to stakeholders or work with the leg as in the mandate. I know that it's the Secretariat under the guidance of the Adaptation Committee, but I see much value in including information on regional adaptation efforts from different intergovernmental and regional organizations. And speaking for Africa, I can provide a few documents. For example, one of them is the State of Adaptation Efforts by the Africa Adaptation Initiatives, and a few other documents by the I mean, such as the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, Africa Climate Policy Center, just to name a few. I tend to disagree with the notion that efforts that are not reported cannot be recognized, if I understood that correctly, because again, part of the bigger story of the recognition of efforts that developing countries already are on the front lines with limited capacities, different kinds of capacities. So many developing countries are already struggling to establish the reporting systems under the Convention and the Paris Agreement. They are already facing challenges in reporting. So by saying that we cannot recognize the efforts that are not reported by developing countries, we are undermining the recognition of effort. I mean, for many developing countries, many international and intergovernmental organizations and initiatives, be it regional, local, they collaborate with governments, with the climate change units, you name it, in order to reflect the effort that is being done by those countries and do analysis on the costs incurred, how much developing countries are paying from their own budget, what losses do they incur, and I think this is also where it relates to losses and damages. That is also efforts. So yeah, these are just some of my comments. So yeah, so I think that the context needs to reflect the essence of the recognition of efforts. I think that the scope can include more documents, and the document itself, the content and the structure need to reflect the regional adaptation efforts and the domestic resources. And I have seen throughout the documents, that sometimes for some countries, it is mentioned that among the needs, some needs are mentioned, some needs are not. And usually many of the needs that are not mentioned are financial capacity and technological needs. So I don't know, we either mention it all or decide on a way to go forward with mentioning the needs. And again, the types of efforts mentioned mainly circulate around plans, strategies, legal and regulatory frameworks, policies, concrete project implementation. But again, I think that financial, technical / technology capacities need to be reflected, and that's what is incurred or what is put forward by countries from their own limited, very limited national budgets that are already in debt, overwhelmed with debt, especially least developed countries and others. So for now, I think these are my comments, and I will provide more comments in detail, not only on the AC collaboration space, but I think we share the understanding that the documents will be open in the intersessional period. So as Navina, as Leo, as Pilar and others have mentioned, we will still work on the document. I think a few tweaks and additions need to be made, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Mariam. Indeed, the document will remain open, and we will take forward the work intersessionally based also on the discussion, of course, we are having this week and the initial round of comments. And thanks again for your valuable input. Julio, please.
Thank you very much, Alessandra. I agree with many of the things that have been said, so I'll try to be brief. One thing, of course, I need to say from the start is that I think the document is very rich. I think it has a lot of information, and that it is extremely useful and informative. So my appreciation for the good outcome in this document. One thing that I believe that could be a good development from the document is to have a little bit more aggregated data from the documents that were reviewed for this document. And what I mean by this is that in many cases it says, for example, a majority of developing countries, or sort of a very sort of broad description of what type of what numbers of countries can be identified with such a trend or such an observation. And I think if maybe a little bit more aggregated data can be put in that context, I think it would be helpful for understanding how many countries, how much in the regions is this reflected, and I think that can also be a useful indication for some practitioners in different regions and different countries. So maybe that layer needs to be expanded a little bit more, that layer of information of how many countries are certain are looking into certain responses to certain hazards. And the other point I wanted to make is that maybe the document should also include some instrumental definition of hazards. I know that hazard is mostly used as a synonym of risk, but I think it's not exactly the same. So maybe just for the benefit of the reader, maybe it would be good to have a very short instrumental definition of what we mean by hazard. The other thing is that in section, I think it's in section 3, when specific hazards are described, there is I wouldn't call it an imbalance, but there is a discrepancy, I guess, in the type of information that is under each of the hazards. And I see that in the first case, I think it's for floods, there is a specific information on legal frameworks, on policy and implementation of projects. I don't know if the lack of information make difficult to follow the same structure for each of the hazards, but I guess it would be good to have as much as possible sort of a homogeneous approach to each of the hazards in that kind of information. I think that would also contribute to the good structure of the document. The other thing about structuring, I think, and I've heard many of the colleagues saying that they might be a good idea to have an annex with certain information. Maybe it could be also solved or complemented by having a sort of a one-pager executive summary at the beginning. Maybe that would also help the readability of the document. So I think that could also be easily done. The other thing, of course, is that many of the AC members have already referred to this, but I think the type of responses that are expressed in section 2.2, those 4 responses, I think that's sort of that is the major finding in the document. Which is a global interpretation of how developing countries are reacting to these different hazards, and I guess this is something that should be highlighted a little bit more in the document. It's sort of mentioned also, kind of sort of casually mentioned, and that can be very useful finding even for other purposes. So I think that the document should highlight a little bit more that particular finding. The other thing, of course, is that also many of the members have indicated that there are certain hazards that were not included in the report, and I think the report already mentions why certain hazards were not considered. I think high temperatures were left aside, not for any sort of unjustified reasons, but there are reasons for that. But at the same time, I think it would be good if some hazards that were not included in the report can also be recognized and maybe mapped out as possible subjects or themes for future reports. I think that would be also very useful for the continuation of this work. I fully agree with the idea of having cross-cutting considerations like gender, indigenous people's knowledge, and I think that is mentioned. I think there's a couple of paragraphs on gender considerations, but I think it's not mentioned as cross-cutting issues, and I think that can, 1, be considered, and 2, maybe can be reflected also in the when the major finding, when the 4 types of responses is introduced for the first time in the document. And finally, I just wanted to say that I agreed on the observations about the transboundary dimension of this. I just wanted to say that as much as I agree with this, I think it's also we need to also be careful about the examples that we choose for this, just to avoid choosing any example that might be politically sensitive in some parts of the world. Some transboundary issues about basins or rivers or ecosystems that are shared by countries. Sometimes they have a history, and I'm just saying that maybe it would be good for any mention to be aware of this and not just look at it from the point of view of the adaptation measures, but also from the point of view if the issue has any sort of political baggage or implication. But that's basically from my side. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julio, for your input. I think when it comes to the depth of coverage of the various hazards, my understanding is that this is based indeed on the reports and documents that were available in the survey. But I do agree that to the extent possible, we should try in the document to have a uniform and comprehensive coverage. Of course, we are constrained in terms of the input into the survey itself. I still have Daniel and Alice in my list. I would invite you to be please short in your intervention as we are running a little later time, but it's of course important that we keep, that we provide sufficient time. Cecilia, I also recognize that you would like to take the floor afterwards. So Daniel, please.
Great, thanks for that. And I will try to keep this intervention on the short side and maybe reflect some of these more in-depth comments in the collaborative space. So first of all, thanks to the Secretariat. I think this is an excellent paper. I think, generally well-balanced and covers a variety of examples and information that I found to be very interesting, although obviously some issues. I think generally it shows, the kind of action and building blocks we have in terms of country plans and policies, including the NAPAs, what's captured in NDCs, and some of the possible mechanisms for managing risks and enhancing preparedness and addressing those hazards. But I'd agree generally with Navina that this paper only really highlights and emphasizes examples of international support for country efforts. And we know from a lot of the other work we're doing that developing countries are putting forward national resources to address hazards and coming up with significant plans. So having some discussion of this in addition to the international resources, I think would be helpful. And I heard Miriam highlight this point also. I'd point out that, along with Navina, who I believe pointed this out, that mobilization of private sector finance should be captured in this paper. Private sector finance contributes significantly to general infrastructure and other elements that contribute to either exacerbating or addressing climate hazards, and so I think it's an important element to address in this paper. I also think Navina made a really good point about creating a shared understanding of effort and how we interpret and assess that. And I'd also say that I agree that it's very important to have ex post data in order to really have a full understanding of efforts and take lessons forward for use by countries in addressing hazards. So it might be a good idea to further define the concept of efforts in this context, and could be a good discussion for the AC to have. I think that it might, going on about this issue, some of the other comments that were highlighted with regards to needs that was highlighted specifically by Miriam. Thank you for those comments. I found them interesting. I guess my interpretation is that in this paper, the degree to which needs are covered seems appropriate and well contextualized, and that the issue of needs is being covered extensively elsewhere, and would be outside the scope of this paper if it were became kind of a more concrete focal point. This is obviously on recognition of efforts, and I think that needs would distract from that central core concept. I've got some additional comments, but I'll leave those to the collaborative space, and others can respond to them there. So thank you.
Daniel, thank you very much for the comments and for being brief. Alice, you have the floor now, please.
Thank you. And I will be brief because we need to move on to the next agenda item, I guess. Listening to the discussions, I think that a lot of good ideas to improve this paper, which was a very good starting point from the Secretariat. Thank you. I think those ideas are very valid, and before going into intersessional work, I think we need to bear in mind that we have asked for a synthesis report, which sort of had to be limited and structured and sort of aggregated to some degree. That previous to choosing this topic, I'm sure there were quite interesting and good discussions in this committee, which I was not a part of, but before choosing this topic. And I guess I think we need to focus on it and make it very focused. We need to bear in mind going into the intersessional work that this is one item in quite an expansive plan that we made for recognizing adaptation efforts by developing countries. The plan that we made in Katowice and decided on. So hopefully for our next meeting, we will have more time to spend on this item. And I agree with several speakers that we need a common understanding of what we mean by efforts, if the committee has not really had that before. So I hope we will have more time and also to sort of be aware of the entire process for recognizing adaptation efforts. So perhaps, I think it was you, Julio, alluded to that some of the topics that comes up in these discussions can be addressed in one of the other either reports or events that we have planned. Thank you.
Thank you, Alice, for reminding us that this is part of a broader program of work on recognizing efforts of developing countries on adaptation. I think this is an important aspect to keep in mind as we move ahead discussing further this paper. Cecilia, please.
Thank you, Alessandra. Thank you very much. I believe we are having a very good discussion. I will do some, I'll make some reflections, not as co-chair of the committee, but as a member of the Adaptation Committee. Agreeing with some points that were already raised by colleagues and maybe disagreeing with some other. But what I would like to say is that, yes, I agree with Julio when he says that hazard and efforts that are not recognized in the report should be recognized in a way. I believe, yes, it should be done, and maybe for that, I think the document should leave a window allow this to happen, because as much as we can try to collect information from countries, we will not be able to collect everything, but what is there can always be then recognized as efforts from countries. I also heard that there is no understanding on what efforts mean. I tend to disagree with that, because I think the document itself shows a comprehensive understanding of efforts, and is mentioning efforts in the document from countries. What I think is that some aspects that should be also reflected there, as the finance resources, domestic finance resources that countries utilize it to face hazards and risks, etc., should also be mentioned as efforts being done by at national level. Going to the next steps, I also believe that we need, a part of the intersessional work we will be doing in the document, we will need one more meeting in order for us then to close the document, because this is a very, very important document with a range of details that needs us to together reflect again before closing. Alessandra, thank you. That were my points. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Cecilia, for your suggestions and also for the concrete proposal on how we will be moving forward. I think this is very much in line with the interventions from other colleagues. Mariam, please.
Okay. Thank you so much, Alessandra, for giving me the floor one more time, and I'll make a very quick comment. First, I fully agree with the views expressed by Cecilia, and I would like to respond to Daniel very briefly. I would just like to make it clear, Daniel, that I'm not advocating for like eluding or elaborating more on developing countries' needs. I have actually mentioned that effort, that one of the essential aspects, as Cecilia has mentioned, from effort is domestic resources, the domestic resources that developing countries have invested. And I think that probably Daniel and Navina have proposed, and if we are mentioning support needs, then we should mention international support. But what I need to understand here is that if we are mentioning support needs or support gaps in relation to those efforts, we mention them in relation to the resources, to the domestic resources that countries have, so kind of to compare. So these are the needs, these are the estimated costs in terms, the estimated costs or estimated gaps and needs in terms of technology, financing, capacity building. And this is how much developing countries have put in order to respond to the climate hazards. So this is the context more or less, but I don't see what's the context for the international support, because we are recognizing efforts of developing countries. Are we here recognizing efforts of developed countries? I kind of don't see. And if there's a notion not to include the needs, then on the support needs, then I think by the same token, we shouldn't be discussing support, international support in response to those needs. So yeah, these are my points for now. Thank you for giving me the floor.
Thank you, Mariam, for the clarification and for the question. I think Navina would like to come back on this. Navina, please.
Thank you, Ale. I would like to react, maybe provide some clarity. Thank you, Mariam, for those questions. Perhaps I can provide some clarity to this. I think, in essence, what we're discussing here is the efforts that developing countries make. And there is a discussion for finance. It goes Also, as part of the discussion for the ETF, for the support part, there are different reporting requirements for developed countries. They will put forward certain stuff as of 2023, but this is not the discussion we have here in adaptation. What we were trying to say is that I think perhaps starting with the first point, what is not reported cannot be recognized. It doesn't mean that if it's not reported in an official report, in my perspective, even if it's on a website, even if it's somewhere out there, that's great, but it's information that needs to be somehow available as for us to be able to fetch it and put it into the report. Because me personally, I will hate efforts of developing countries not being in the scope because of lack of awareness from us that they exist. Now, coming back to the support thing, I think here we're not saying that we want to highlight international support, not at all. We think that this whole discussion is somewhere else, A, and B, I agree that some stuff that developing countries in the umbrella of alignment are doing can be showcased here. And one very good example is on element A and B of the NAP process. We have as the objective of the NAP process is mainstreaming adaptation at all sectors in order to increase resilience, reduce vulnerability, and enhance adaptive capacity. So one of the things that the NAP process does at one of the first steps after taking a stock take of what the country has, it does an alignment. The NAP process provides country with a financial strategy, a prioritization of actions, and then it has an alignment of how much things will be covered from outside and the things that are covered from inside, how will they be aligned through Ministry of Finance planning, through the other ministries and so on. And that kind of document, that kind of policy process, that's something very rich that we can learn from. I, however, don't see any value or any need to go on a continuous discussion that, in my opinion, we have been having for a long time of saying this is ex-ante information, and that's an effort. I don't think that's how it works. It has to work in terms of what is a country doing in terms to address a gap and need, and the gaps and needs are in other papers. So that's the matching I see. And I think here we have really rich examples of what countries are doing, but those examples are not how much money a country is spending. Expenditure is by no means a token of a good or a bad reaction. The assessment of adaptation is an outcome level, not an expenditure level. A country that spends lesser money can be way better adapted and have done a way better effort. That's not a measure, and here I think we can have as AC members another space for a longer discussion, because we have had this discussion already in Sao Tome, and I'm not sure that we're going in the right direction at the moment. I think I covered both questions. If not, please do let me know.
Thank you, Navina, for providing your point of view and clarifying the questions, responding to Mariam's intervention. It looks like this does deserve some further discussion between the members of the Adaptation Committee that I hope we can still have at the next meeting. But we have all taken good notes of the various points of view expressed by members. I think there are no more interventions from members of the Adaptation Committee, so I would like to give the floor to the observers who have been very patient. Thank you very much for waiting, but of course this discussion was very interesting and valuable, so we did not want to cut it short. I think I have Hannah from the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe first. Hannah, please.
Hello, dear colleagues. Thank you a lot for very good discussion and also for the paper. I would say that this report would be also very useful for the Water Convention, because we are working on disaster risk reduction in transboundary basins under change in climate. And in this regard, I would like also to thank to the AC members and to the secretariat for bringing transboundary aspect to this discussion, because indeed such disasters as floods, drought, storms and others don't recognize borders, and their impact is far beyond one country. But at the same time, as it was said, countries do join efforts and address disasters or hazards together. And there are quite a lot of examples, for example, from Africa, from the Volta Basin in West Africa, from the Niger Basin, also in West Africa, from Lake Victoria in East Africa. Also, there was an example by Irina from Moldova. And in other parts like Southeast Asia, in the Mekong Basin, countries are also addressing hazards together. So I just want to add, if there would be a bigger section on transboundary aspects, we from the side of the Water Convention and UNEC are happy to provide the materials we have. For example, we have the report of the Global Network of Basins covering disaster risk reduction. We have some information on the reporting under SDG 652 on transboundary cooperation. Also, we have some guidance on disaster risk reduction in transboundary basins and change in climate. So we are happy to be involved from our side, and it was already acknowledged that maybe regional commissions need to contribute to this as well. And apart from the transboundary perspective, I would like also to agree that financing remains one of the main challenges for developing countries. And here mobilizing private sector would be important. Thank you a lot for your attention and giving the floor.
Thank you, Hannah, and also for the offer of supporting the work of the paper by providing additional material and documents that could be considered. I now have Donna from the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies. Donna, the floor is yours.
Thank you and good evening, everyone. Greetings from Manila. My mic is working now. Thank you for the help of the Secretariat in fixing this glitch. I just want to say that we're very happy with the papers that we've been reading so far, and we're really learning a lot from it in the process. And from the humanitarian sector, this is something that is close to our heart, and we will be happy to submit contributions to the discussions in writing, especially linked to the humanitarian consequences and how this is actually, what are the things being done to help reduce vulnerabilities and build resilience. So just to say that we would be submitting and interested to submit in the coming days. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Donna, for the offer. And thank you, colleagues, for the very useful discussions we've been having for the past hour and a half or so. I think we've hashed out some important elements that we need to consider. I'm really looking forward to reading even more of your comments in the collaborative space, but of course also to continue in the discussion with you intersessionally on this topic. I'd also like to take the opportunity to remind the observer, following on Donna's intervention, that they can submit comments on all documents and updates that are on the Adaptation Committee website within 3 weeks from the end of this meeting, that is by the 17th of April. With this, I'd like to thank all of you again for the discussion on this agenda item, and I'll hand over to Cecilia to take us through the next item for us today. Thank you very much again.
Thank you very much, Alessandra and colleagues. We really had a very good discussion on the item. But before we move to our agenda item 8C, there are a couple of announcements we would like to make for the AC members. To remind AC members that at the end we will need you to stay a bit more on the meeting for the group photo. As well, remind colleagues to please respond to the Secretariat email and express interest in leading or contributing on items on our work plan. My co-chair and I, we have also worked with the Secretariat on a timeline for intersessional work after this meeting. You will also receive it from the Secretariat, and we will have a time slot on Friday to discuss on those issues. Now, I would like to invite the Adaptation Committee to look to document AC/2020/10, which is the draft technical paper on the draft technical paper on data for adaptation at different spatial and temporal scales. Can you all hear me? Can you all hear me? Okay.
Yes, we can hear you very well, Cecilia.
Okay, and for that, I would like to invite the Secretariat to please present the background document on this document. The Secretariat, please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Cecilia. On the draft technical paper, you may recall that AC15 agreed on the preparation of a technical paper on connecting short, medium, and long-term adaptation planning at national and subnational level, including data, financial flows, and others. Then at the last meeting, the AC agreed to focus the paper on data, taking into account the different time perspectives and linkages of data needs to various stages in the adaptation process. And the AC also requested the Secretariat to present a draft of this paper for the consideration of the AC at its 17th meeting. You may have had a chance to look at the draft technical paper. You may have noticed that it starts off with an overview of different data categories to support the adaptation process. These categories spanning historic, observational, and projected data, depending on the stage of the process itself. The paper goes on to describe the sources and processes through which these categories of data are provided across different scales, national, but also regional and subnational. It also provides an overview of the different climate services as the bridge between data supply and data demand. And it also discusses remaining gaps, challenges, and needs when it comes to the different data categories and users. It ends with an annex with information on international arrangements that provide such data and services. And at this point, the AC may wish to provide guidance in terms of how to finalize the draft, including any follow-ups, information that is currently missing and you wish to see being included, and also whether you'd like that report to be in a user-friendly format. And I note that the question was posed during the earlier discussion. That would mean that we would basically put it in a nicer layout, possibly also highlighting some of the aspects currently included in the executive summary to make them to turn them into some briefs, and then use the various channels to promote the work. With that, I thank you very much and hand over back to Cecilia.
Thank you very much, Annette. I now invite DAC to make interventions, to provide your point of views on the questions at the end. So, and of course, also to provide other inputs you may see as pertinent. The floor is open.
Cecilia, we already have a list.
Yes, I have Alice first on my list. Alice, you have the floor.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you to the Secretariat for preparing this very comprehensive, quite detailed, and this certainly is a technical paper. It's the core definition of a technical paper, I think. So I don't have very much comments to the chapters, like the chapter 4 and 5 and 6. I have two minor comments. One is that I think this paper much better recognizes the importance of local level knowledge and data. I think that was missing in the previous version. And then in the summary, we're making reference to the assessment of the global goal on adaptation, and that process might require additional data. I think there are a lot of processes under the Paris Agreement and the Convention that may require additional data. So I don't see the point in singling out sort of just one process. But my main intervention is the chapter 7. which is divided, and the terminology used, which is sort of just summarizes the usual what we call gaps, challenges, and needs. And I started reading these very carefully. And then I realized that especially what's under the category challenges are just huge opportunities. And this is one aspect, I think, data and data sharing and encouraging sharing data. This is really where international cooperation can make a difference, because we sit on each country and we have our available data, and even for a whole region. And if we share and use each other's data, all of a sudden 1 + 1 is not 2 anymore, it's a lot more. So I think we should emphasize these opportunities much better than characterizing them as challenges. So I can throw in a few examples, and I think that these points made in 7.2 and 7.3 are very relevant to policymakers. For instance, if we rephrase them and are able to show the added value. If we do like this and this, we can achieve so and so. So I think we need a bit more working on this. I for instance, looked at the second point on the big data, moving from open data to open science, which is a huge opportunity if we can share algorithms, tools, and knowledge in addition to only sharing the data. So this is just one example. So I think we could perhaps call these sections something like, how can we improve the availability, the quality, and the use of data? And also, like I tried to say that if we can also add the added value by doing this, it will be a lot more policy relevant, and this paper might do more impact the way I see it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Alice. Well noted. Of the reflections were well noted. So we can see that what is challenge can, of course, be opportunities in some aspects. I now have on my list Vladimir. Vladimir, please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Cecilia. I hope you hear me well.
Yes, very well.
Okay. First of all, I'd like to say that, as Alice mentioned, it's a technical paper. Yes, it is. And I think it's very good that it is technical. I personally appreciate this kind of technicality, and I think it's potentially really helpful text paper. And starting from the very end, I should say that I really believe that after some work on it, the publication in a user-friendly mode would be helpful as well. It's a comprehensive paper, and I really appreciate the work of Secretariat putting together many different things. I apologize that I haven't read it through thoroughly, and I'm not actually going to give you some minor points about possible improvements of the text. I think it's the matter of future. But at this point, I probably should highlight a couple of things. And I think the most one of the most crucial parts of this paper, of course, in addition to the great amount of information, helpful information, which can be used in practice by those who probably would read this paper, I should say that the sections, the very important sections such as gaps, challenges, and needs really need some more careful attention. And starting from the very beginning, saying that, for example, the gaps in paragraph 79, saying that availability of data for adaptation at all scales remains the main gap. I would say that I'm not sure I can agree with this statement. I would say that availability of data is not that a great gap, like interpretation of the available data. And particularly, I have in mind the tremendous amount, the luxury of data coming from projections, and we really look in the future when we need to proactively adapt to climate change. This is really a tremendous amount of data which have a risk to be misused if applied without decent level of expertise. So I just briefly could go through the possible problems which that kind of data presume, and these things are more or less mentioned through the paper, as I noted, but probably these things can be concentrated as some part of it, maybe in this section of gaps. I should say that there are such things like discrimination of climate models. We now have something like 17 models which are going to be used in the last round of IPCC, the sixth assessment report. It's a tremendous number of models of different quality, and this is a big science behind how to discriminate between these models to use the data in applications. There are such things like optimum size of ensembles, the edit value and edit uncertainty of downscaling techniques of different kinds, different level of reliability, of credibility of the data generated, of climate characteristic generated by the models. For example, temperature is much more deserving much more credit than, for example, precipitation, to say nothing about wind and some other things. So there is a lot of science, important science behind this, and this cannot be dealt easily by the users. So it's very important part of this paper, I believe. There are some things which probably are not, which are somewhat outdated at this point. For example, it mentions grand challenges of World Climate Program, but I have to check this, but as far as I know, the new strategy plan, which was written a couple of years ago and started from the previous year. It's a 10-year plan. It doesn't include the grand challenges anymore. There are some mistakes or misunderstanding in this text. For example, such statements like global climate model outputs are only available as monthly means whereby adaptation requires information on much smaller timescales. Of course, adaptation needs information on much smaller timescales, but the global climate model generates different timescales of data, and of course, daily data and several hours data are available in principle. So it's it has to be improved. I really understand that we are short in time, so probably I should not continue too far with this. I appreciate mentioning somewhere in the text of challenges, the uncertainty which is to be interpreted to the users. And we are coming back to interpretation issue in the needs section. However, I see some space for a little bit further, maybe not condensing, but restructuring of this text and thinking about some priorities of the needs and challenges. So I think it's very interesting already. It is going to be even more interesting after some additional work. And also responding to the call from secretariat, I really would be happy not to lead but to join the team which would hopefully continue the work on this paper. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you very much, Vladimir, for this very useful contribution. I now have on my list Kazim. Kazim, you have the floor, please.
Yes, thank you, co-chair. Thank you, secretariat, for preparing very comprehensive paper. You know that the NAP implementation requires the reliable baseline information which can be updated regularly and periodically. Due to the dynamic nature of the socio-economic factors and the essential climate variables, ECVs, systematic introduction of the regional and global data gathering sources and helping for the availability of them by AC to the parties is important. Also, at the same time, I think there should be a kind of cooperation between AC and GCF, a readiness supporting program, for building capacities to the parties for adaptation data gathering and management. Thank you.
Kasim, are you done in your intervention?
No, finish. Cecilia?
Yes, I can hear now.
Yes, I finished my comments.
Thank you very much, Kazim. Thank you. Now I have Clifford on my list. Clifford, you have the floor, please.
Thank you very much, Cecilia. I had already submitted comments earlier on this paper, and I'm happy to see that some have been taken on board. Again, excellent work from the secretariat. I agree with Vladimir that this could do with a little bit more work, but certainly what we have here is quite good. I am very pleased with what we have before us. Data is the linchpin, is the foundation, is the basis of anything that you're going to do with respect to adaptation, with respect to climate change itself. But certainly know that we are focusing on adaptation. And I'm sure this technical paper is going to be, it captures a lot of what we've been doing. It captures a lot of the actors, the wide range of actors. It's an excellent paper. One, I think that we should try and get it peer reviewed by some university or the other, just to have it, because I think this is an important, very, very important document, one for posterity and one that will guide us as we go forward with our work on adaptation. Thank you very much, Coach.
Thank you very much, Clifford. I hope the secretariat could take note of Clifford's points, because I was hearing with a bit of problems in connection. I now have on my list Julio. Julio, please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Cecilia. Just very quickly, three points. First of all, thank you for the paper, which is I believe it's a very good contribution and clarifies a lot of what all these climate data systems really are all about, and it's very informative. I just have a couple of observations. One is the how different examples are put throughout the paper. I have the feeling that the main topic of the paper is about climate systems at the global level, and I think the way those climate systems are used in specific cases has a lot of value in itself, but somehow I feel that it would be sort of a different topic, a different paper in a way. So I think it should be reviewed the way the examples are portrayed. There are not many examples, so I think that calls for rethinking of how those can fall into the narrative of the paper in general. The second observation I wanted to make is also in the gap section. I think when in paragraph 80, it says in the first bullet, the coverage of in situ observation system is insufficient in some regions of the world. And please correct me if I'm wrong, but this sounds like an understatement. I have the feeling that this is a major problem, a major consideration that needs to be taken into account, because in many regions of the world, the observation systems in situ are clearly not enough, and it is one of the major hurdles for having information and data that is specific to certain locations of the world, especially in developing countries, and that I think that should be sort of underlined in a more clearer way, which leads me to the third point that I want to make. Which is that although it's recognized throughout the text, I think the principle of free information from all these systems, information that is free and available to all, I think that should also be further highlighted and underlined as an important element. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julio, for this very useful contributions. I have now on my list Daniel. Daniel, please, you have the floor.
Great, thank you. Just some quick comments. I'm really appreciating, first of all, some of the AC members who obviously have more background and expertise in modeling and meteorology and climatology than I do, but I'll do my best. And we'll also note that some of the technical experts from our agencies will be reviewing the paper and providing additional comments in addition to mine. So I will note that in the paper there is some good discussion of downscaling and its limitations, and it is identified as a gap. But in my view, this is a really crucial point, and a better discussion to convey our understanding of the uncertainty associated with downscaling approaches. And I would say especially of the RCPs and global concentration models, not to mention attempts to interpret shared economic pathways in a downscaled manner, should be further fleshed out in this paper. I think, for example, there's the box 2, the case study referring to Sudan, discusses downscaling in their efforts and mentions offhandedly statistical downscaling, but it's really unclear that there's, in general, and I would imagine in this case, a high degree of uncertainty associated with a lot of those statistical downscaling methods. So it's huge implications for policymakers and other users. So I think that could be fleshed out in the paper a bit more. The use of qualitative data in informing climate risk and approaches to adaptation, obviously incredibly hard to evaluate. It crosses geographic and temporal scales and is incredibly multivariate, but it also does seem worthy of a bit of an expanded discussion in this paper. And I would say probably especially in the context of assessing overall vulnerability at a local and national scale. Obviously, qualitative information not possible to project really into the future with any realistic certainty. But I would say that observational data ex post can inform our thinking. So might be worthwhile to have some additional discussion of the use of qualitative data. It's been highlighted by others, Julio just mentioned, but the discussion of open data and data access is incredibly important. And this paper does discover it in depth, but I'll be providing some additional detailed comments on that. And with that, I will end my intervention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daniel, for the valuable contributions. I now have on my list Pilar. Pilar, please, you have the floor. I see Ronnie. Sorry, Pilar. We have the video stuck on Julio. Can we see when members are speaking, please?
Sí.
Pilar, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Cecilia. And since we ran out of time, I will reduce my comments and send them to the collaborative space. Just to focus on, first of all, to thank the paper. I think it's a very good one, and we could benefit from, and also making a relationship with the leadership of papers. Maybe we could benefit from an AC member to lead the changes, the future changes in the paper in the intersessional period, just to highlight that. I suggest some more work with examples. I think some of the members refer to that. In some cases, they are. I think that it could be better connected with the rest of the text. It's more a reflection on how is developed, or the example is developed. I agree with many others, from Alice, that was the first one, to all members that refer to the section of gaps and challenges. I agree that is quite important to the issue of data access and many other issues. So one, in terms of cooperation, I think it could be better explore which are our recommendations for cooperation on data at different levels. And that could include the financial dimension. I really would like to see that AC this year as a consequence of our conversation here. We have a recommendation to the financial architecture funds in terms of data access and how we can include this dimension in a better way in our projects. So this is something that I would really like to see, at least, I don't know, reflected in another way. It says finance and 3 points, but it could be developed in terms of how of this dimension in the projects. At the same time, in terms of historical data, at some point I miss some parts, so I could like to see a little bit more on historical data, but I will submit on that. And one last, very quickly, is in terms also of the title, short, medium, and long term. It's like, it's presumed that the relationship between the scales is based on the different types of data, but I'm not so sure that is the case, and in particular in relation to mitigation action. So that is also something that I would like to see added. But I will come back with my comments in a written base. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Pilar. And we took note, Secretariat took note, and you will have it included, and we will, of course, wait for the inputs on the test. Before going to Mariam, Javier, you have raised your hand. Do you have something you want to have the floor, or you raised your hand by mistake? Javier, please.
Hi, Cecilia.
Hi, Javier.
Hi.
Did you raise your hand? Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, thank you. First of all, very thankful for the excellent document. This is I agree, first, it's a technical document. This is a robust proposal. But I think there is a different challenge about the implementation issues. The principal, for me, challenge, this is a coordination between different ministries. This is agriculture, the effective way in our country. Principle, the type of data, like Pilar said, this is identify very good what is of indicators. This is important to reflect in the document and the different ministers. My suggestion is to consider those issues, the interconnection or that it's very important to reflect in the document, to implement this technical approach. Thank you very much.
Very much, Javier. We took note of that. Mariam, you have the floor.
Cecilia, Navina, because Mariam is having some technical problems.
Navina, if you can hear us, please, you have the floor, Navina.
Cecilia. In thank Secretariat for the paper all set, and I think, Vladimir, your points are way technical knowledge. I don't them. I think so that it could benefit from using a particular to make it useful listeners that have not been used to this technical language as they're not experts. Also, it would be clearly addressing the questions of data available for adaptation planning, answering the concern that there is not enough data for planning. I think we have had previous conversations here with representatives from WMO and other organizations that have provided examples here, and also addressing more in depth the issue of uncertainty and how countries can undertake adaptation in light of imperfect data supply, identify how much data is really needed to be able to act and what needs to be done to get there. I think often we don't really look at this in a precise or accurate way, and accurate information needs to be there in a way to make good decision making and help the planning process and addressing adaptation in a better way. That being said, I think I will provide more concrete comments on the collaborative space. There's just one remark. While the paper overall, I think it's a very good basis and also very fact-oriented, there seems to be a few instances where we're not using scientific evidence as a backing, but perhaps positions or interpretations. I'm not sure where they came from. I agree with Alice. I don't understand why the global goal and adaptation is addressed here. I don't think that was the idea of the paper or the question of data that we're addressing of. We're talking about the global goal and adaptation in another level, and we don't know at this moment whether there will be a data need or not. What we do know at this moment is that at the national and subnational level, there are questions about how to get around the issue of data, and especially the issue that Julio raised, that data might not be available, especially for some small island states, for some regions of the world where data is not providing the projections in the way. So I don't understand why this is here, and I don't think we need it here. The same, I would like to be a bit more careful if we look at the executive summary, point number A. In principle, I am very in favor of a stronger cooperation at the regional and international level. However, the way this is phrased, it sounds as something that has been established in writing this paper, and I don't see how we go to that conclusion in the paper. It sounds more like a conclusion or a recommendation than a fact or something that can be drawn from the paper. So I see a need for a lot of amendments there, or just deleting it. And with view of time, I will think Mariam is now online. I will stop here.
Thank you very much, Navina. If we have Mariam, you have the floor. Ronnie, can you confirm if Mariam is back? If not, we can go to move to Liu. Liu, you have the floor, please.
All right, the audio is delayed and slightly interrupted, but I hope you can hear me.
Sorry,
I'll make
so
my
we
comment.
have Mariam back.
Yeah, okay, so I'll just make one comment quickly and provide the rest on the AC collaboration space. So first, I would like to appreciate the preparation of this this document, and I have learned a lot reading it. I'm still digesting it, and I'll provide more in detail comment. For the time being, I could see a number of references to the GCF climate rationale, which in my understanding, it's still an ongoing discussion under the board, and no decisions have been taken to that regard. Then So that's why I think we better remove all of these references, because it's still an ongoing discussion under the GCF board. So when it's decided, we can include it. However, it's not. And that's my comment for now. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Marian. We took very, very well note of that aspect. Liu, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Cecilia, and thanks, Secretariat, for this document. Just one comment briefly. Actually, I agree with the point raised by Pilar, that there is some missing point existed in the historical data. I noted that there is very short, only 2 paragraphs in the 4.3 related to the historical data, but I think that's very important for adaptation, especially we know that there is very huge technical barriers on the baseline for adaptation. That is the basis of how to measure or track the adaptation progress compared with the past. So that I think the historical data should be highlight this these issues under the historical data, this section. And from my personal perspective, I want to see some successful case study or evidence to from the different levels they have been used to assess to use some data to assess their to establish their baseline for maybe for some specific sector or specific hazard or risks to be illustrated under this section, and also from the case study, I think it's maybe more valuable to identify their gaps and the challenges during they use the historical data to establish their baseline. So that is the some point I think it should add into the relevant sections related to the historical data. And thank you.
Well noted, Liu. Thank you very much. I see no more, for now, no calls for the floor from members. I would like to move a little bit to the observers, if the AC agrees. Okay, thank you. Ronnie, I can't see from here any observer asking for the floor. Do you have any information I don't have, please?
Neither do I. Neither do I. I don't have any information.
Okay. So anyway, I come back to the members, and if members have nothing more to add for now, I think we are all a bit tired. We have been discussing for more than 3 hours, but it's always important to remind that members are free and have time to provide information in the documents on the collaborative area, and of course by the emails we have from the Secretariat and from the co-chairs. For the observers, it's important also to say that they have 3 weeks time to provide information on documents through the AC webpage. They can go there to download documents and do the updates, and then send it to the Secretariat email, which is ac@unfccc.int. If the AC agrees, so I think we can now close our meeting for today. Thank you very much to everyone. I would again ask the members to remain for a while for our group photo. Thank you very much. We are all trying
That is
to...
fantastic. That is fantastic. Let me give you all the touches you need. Let me give you all the touches you need. Exactly.
Okay.
Your hair, Julio.
Move it a bit to the left.
All right. I guess let me take people out of here.
So is a professional person taking a picture, or will we take a screenshot?
I'm just going to swipe my hand, and that's going to be it. No, I'm just kidding. Karina and Fating, thank you.